Imagine a tuber that yields as much as a potato, but thrives in desolate soils where no other crop can take root. It appears in every color of the spectrum, and after a frost, it develops a flavor like sweet fruit. And for 8,000 years, before Europeans ever set foot on the continent, it was the foundation of entire civilizations. But then, the Conquistadors saw it as a symbol of survival, a food that gave people independence without their consent. For their empire, they chose the potato and condemned this one to obscurity. This is the chronicle of the crop they tried to eliminate to maintain control. Welcome to the channel, where the archives are now open. Our story begins in the coastal desert of Peru, at archaeological sites near what is now Lemur. While excavating the arid sands, researchers unearthed an astonishing discovery: perfectly preserved tubers, small, vibrant, cylindrical, and covered in a uniquely bumpy skin. Carbon dating confirmed they were 4,252 years old, but that was merely on the coast, far higher in the Andes, at a location known as Tres Ventanas, nearly 4,000 meters above sea level. Investigators found signs that this crop's cultivation might stretch back 10,000 years, a 10 millennia partnership between humanity and a single plant, a relationship that predates the pyramids, predates written history, and predates the laying of the first stone in Rome. Yet, the most crucial detail of these discoveries is what was absent. These tubers were not found with any potato remains. They were discovered in locations where potatoes could not have been reliably cultivated. This was never a secondary crop. This was the essential food source for communities farming at the very limits of what was thought possible. It was the plant they relied upon when high altitude, freezing cold, and nutrient-poor soil guaranteed that all other crops would perish. This is oca, known to science as Oxalis tuberosa, the second most vital tuber in the Andes. For 8 millennia, Quechua and Aymara farmers grew oca in rotation with potatoes, assigning it to the marginal lands, the steep slopes, and the depleted soils where even the hardy potato could not survive. They knew it as uca, and they meticulously engineered it into a pillar of food security. Based on its chemical properties, they established 2 primary classifications. The bitter types, known as Louis or Pusca, had elevated levels of oxalic acid. Farmers would submerge these tubers in water for a month before freeze, drying them in the brutal Andean nights, transforming them into kaya, a preserved food that could last for years, as insurance against famine. In contrast, the sweet varieties, or miski, were left in direct sunlight for several days. Immediately after being harvested, the sun's rays would break down the acid and elevate the glucose, converting a root vegetable into something that could be enjoyed raw like a piece of fruit, or prepared by boiling, baking, and frying much like a sweet potato. The sheer variety was breathtaking. The tubers came in shades from white and cream to brilliant pink, rich red, and deep purple. Farmers bestowed poetic names on their creations, like black ash and red cosmos flower. This was a form of botanical artistry, refined over thousands of years, and its nutritional value reveals why oca was so fundamental to Andean civilization. Fresh oca boasts 42% more vitamin C than potatoes. It contains 45% more iron. It has almost 4 times the vast amount of fiber. It is rich in protein with a complete amino acid profile, all while containing fewer calories and carbohydrates than a potato. But the true mastery of oca lay in its agricultural function. Traditional Andean Farmers cultivated it at elevations reaching 4,100 meters, which is 13,000 feet. It flourished on inclines so steep that modern tractors would tumble. It grew in earth left barren by other plants. It demanded no fertilizers and no pesticides, requiring only occasional weeding, and the harvests were immense. Using traditional techniques, its output rivaled that of the potato. However, with modern, virus-free seed varieties, oca can yield up to 55 tons per hectare. That production surpasses many industrial potato strains, and oca achieves this in environments where the potato would utterly fail. This was far from simple subsistence agriculture. It was a highly advanced system of agricultural engineering designed to pull the maximum amount of nutrition from an unforgiving landscape. Ceramic vessels from 1,000 years ago show oca depicted alongside other sacred crops. It was a dietary cornerstone, a pillar of their empire. The records from the Spanish conquest describe it as being of immense value, but those very same records detail the events that followed. On November 16, 1532, Francisco Pizarro seized the Inca Emperor Atahualpa. Even after being paid a ransom that filled an entire room with gold, Pizarro had him executed. The Spanish crown and the church insisted that European plants must supplant the indigenous agriculture. Wheat, barley, and broad beans. These were deemed the crops of a superior civilization. From the Spanish perspective, the foods of the Inca had to be systematically suppressed and driven toward extinction. However, the Spanish allowed for a single exception. They adopted the potato. So why the potato and not oca? The reason exposes the entire logic behind their agricultural empire. This aligned perfectly with the colonial agenda. Potatoes served as a convenient staple for the vast numbers of forced laborers in the silver mines. Moreover, potatoes seamlessly integrated into the European agricultural paradigm of vast, single-crop fields. Crucially, the potato offered significantly less genetic variation. This homogeneity allowed the Spanish to standardize its cultivation far more readily than the hundreds of unique oca varieties grown locally. Oca, by its very nature, represented a profound danger to the colonial authority. It embodied indigenous agricultural knowledge that existed entirely beyond the grasp of European understanding. It symbolized a form of food security that was independent of European seeds or agricultural methodologies. It underscored the inherent capacity of indigenous populations to sustain themselves autonomously on marginal lands, territories the Spanish found difficult to govern or tax effectively. Consequently, oca was deliberately pushed to the margins. It was stigmatized, branded as the impoverished farmers, tuber, synonymous with backwardness and destitution. This deeply ingrained stigma endured for nearly 5 centuries. Even in contemporary, urban centers of Peru and Bolivia, oca is frequently perceived as mere rural peasant fare. The very crop that sustained the Inca for 8,000 years was relegated to the status of a simple garden vegetable. Yet, one thing the Spanish could never eradicate was the inherent biological reality of what oca embodies. One cannot patent a crop with an 8,000-year history. One cannot compel farmers to purchase new oca seeds annually because oca naturally propagates vegetatively from its tubers. Any farmer cultivating oca can perpetually save their own planting stock. One cannot mandate fertilizers because oca thrives even in nutrient-poor soils. One cannot engineer dependency because oca is perfectly adapted to the most challenging conditions where industrial agriculture falters. Oca intrinsically offers agricultural sovereignty. This has always been its perceived threat. It is not that oca is somehow inferior to potatoes. It is that oka empowers people to feed themselves without any reliance on the industrial food system. However, knowledge often proves harder to suppress than plants. The contemporary resurgence of oka began subtly within gene banks. The International Potato Center in Peru now meticulously maintains more than 800 distinct varieties, preserving them as a vital safeguard against potential loss. Researchers such as Dr. Eve M. Schwiller dedicated decades to employing DNA sequencing to trace oka's origins back to its ancient wild ancestors, thereby confirming its remarkable complexity and deep lineage. M. Schwiller's work revealed that what local farmers often refer to as a single variety is, in fact, frequently a blend of multiple genotypes. This very genetic complexity is precisely what renders oka impossible to commodify. One cannot patent a crop boasting such extensive, farmer-maintained diversity. However, the most successful modern adoption of oka occurred far from its Andean birthplace. In 1860, oka was introduced to New Zealand, most likely transported on whaling vessels. New Zealanders swiftly recognized what the Spanish had deliberately chosen to overlook, that oka was remarkably resilient, profoundly nutritious, and truly delicious. They named it New Zealand yam, despite it not being a true yam, and have cultivated it commercially ever since. Today, you can easily purchase oka in New Zealand supermarkets. It is enjoyed raw in salads, roasted in the manner of potatoes, and incorporated into hearty stews. New Zealand farmers unequivocally demonstrated that oka does not require the machinery of industrial agriculture to flourish. It simply needs respect for its inherent qualities, a perennial tuber that yields abundant food on marginal lands with minimal inputs. This is precisely what the world desperately needs, as climate patterns become increasingly unpredictable and industrial agriculture proves less and less sustainable. The oka plant itself is strikingly beautiful. It grows close to the ground, featuring thick, succulent stems and leaves resembling clover. These leaves are edible, possessing a pleasant tartness akin to sorrel. The flowers are also edible, but its true value lies beneath the earth. Oka is truly a creature of light. It specifically requires short daylight hours to initiate tuber formation. In autumn, as the days progressively shorten, the plant channels its energy downwards. The longer these tubers remain in the soil, the larger they ultimately become. In regions experiencing harsh winters, harvesting typically takes place after the initial frost. The cold temperature actually enhances the flavor, converting starches into natural sugars. The harvested tubers can then be stored for many months in any cool, dark room. No sophisticated, high-tech refrigeration is necessary. And here lies the truly remarkable aspect. Outside of its native Andes, oka experiences virtually no pests or diseases. In Europe and North America, it grows with almost zero ecological pressure. This represents agricultural gold, a highly nutritious, immensely productive crop that demands minimal inputs and faces practically no threats. Yet, it remains largely unknown to the vast majority of the world. Why? Because oka embodies a fundamental type of agriculture that resists external control. It cannot be patented. Its seeds cannot be sold annually. It does not necessitate purchased inputs. It cannot be reduced to a standardized commodity. Oka is, quite literally, agricultural sovereignty in physical form, and that, precisely, is why it was systematically suppressed. Not because it was inherently inferior, but because it was too adept at what it did. The knowledge persists within the soil, in tubers passed from one farmer to the next, in the strategic cultivation on marginal lands that maximizes food production across challenging terrains. This knowledge was never truly lost. It was simply waiting to be rediscovered. If opening this vault has awakened something in you, I urge you to subscribe and activate notifications. Every like and each share fortifies this wisdom against the forces that would see it buried. We unseal the next vault shortly,